Aloha mai kako. Welcome to the Kale Center for Sustainable Island Food Systems 4th Brown Bag Speaker Series event. My name is Ioane, and on behalf of the center, I want to mahalo all of our guests and presenters for taking the time to attend today. Also, please feel free to scan the QR code in the bottom left corner of the current slide to see previous events that we've hosted through one of our partners' webpage, Transforming Hawaii's Food System Together. And stay tuned for the recording of this event, which will be posted within a couple of days. And don't worry if you can't scan it in time. The slides will be, or the link rather, will be made available as the event gets rolling. This speaker series is one of the projects we're working on at the Kale Center for Sustainable Island Food Systems, which is an initiative within the University of Hawaii system, co-directed by both Dr. Noah Lincoln and Dr. Albie Miles. One of our major goals here is to collaborate with folks at UH and across the entire food systems landscape in Hawaii to highlight the work being done by organizations to improve our local food system. This includes addressing topics such as food security, justice and equity within the food system, ecological sustainability, and food system policy, to name a few. Oftentimes, this work is being done in silos, so we're here trying to make these connections, build and maintain important relationships, and share the work being done by all of these organizations with the people that it is significantly affecting. Overall, we want to better identify what the university can do to support food systems transformation in Hawaii. Regarding our name, Kale Mau, this is a term that's being used to describe the idea of sustainability with a more kind of contemporary use of Olelo Hawaii. With O being a word for food that was prepared and taken on long journeys aboard Ba'a. These were food supplies that sustained voyagers on their long treks in the Pacific Ocean. And today, similarly, we are on a long transformative journey to improve our food system. In addition to hosting events such as this, the Kale Mau Center is also set up to engage in a number of different activities, including research, data collection, education, community engagement, policy analysis, and other monitoring activities that you can see here. And the intention here is really to create and maintain the social, intellectual, economic, and political spaces necessary to drive systemic change in a forward direction for the food system in Hawaii in order to measure and realize food sustainability goals. So many of these materials will be made available in the near future as we continue to stand up the organization and build out our website. So please be patient, be on the lookout in your email inboxes as we continue to grow and share our resources and materials. And without further delay, I would like to introduce our guests today. We're joined by three amazing women working in many different spaces, but all sharing a common topic of food systems policy for the Brown Bag Speaker Series event. We have Kelsey Amos from Hawaii Food Plus Policy, Daniela Spoto from Hawaiʻi Appleseed Center for Law and Economic Justice, and Frederick from the Hawaii Alliance for Progressive Action, or HAPA. A few housekeeping items. All the audience interaction today is limited to the Q&A feature within the Zoom platform, and any questions not addressed within the allotted time could be answered via email from our panelist guests after the event. Each presenter will now take about 15 minutes to provide a brief summary of their respective organization's mission and vision. Then they'll discuss past initiatives, accomplishments, the current priorities and core activities of their organization, some 3 to 5 year future goals, and key challenges faced in advancing the mission and agenda of their org, as well as ways they're working with other organizations along with the community and how their impact is being measured. So now I'd like to hand it over to Kelsey.
Mahalo, Ioane. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for having me. Let me get my share screen going here. All right. Slideshow. Is this right? Does this look like a slideshow now for you all? All right.
It's looking good.
Okay, so again, thanks to SCFS for having me, and happy to, honored to be here with Daniela and Anne too. Excited for their presentations. This is Hawaii Food Plus Policy. We are a program of Purple Mai'a Foundation. We may show up in the world kind of looking like our own organization in some ways, but I just wanted to put that out there. Purple Mai'a runs Food Plus Policy. And we are, and this is Purple Maia's mission: to educate and empower the next generation of culturally grounded, community-serving technology makers and problem solvers. We're about 10 years old, and we're actually more known probably at Purple Mai'a for our youth STEM education, culture-based STEM, particularly coding and computer science. But we do a variety of other things: workforce development, entrepreneurship, design, a bunch of stuff like that. And so what does Food Plus have to do with that? So Food Plus is I'll get to in a second what it is. It's an internship, basically. It's an advocacy internship focused on the food system. And where did it come about? If we think back to 2020, here's like a little look into my life at the time. If you remember the masks and everybody was making sourdough bread and it was an election year. Blast from the past 4 years ago. This is kind of when the idea for Food Plus really started incubating in my own mind. Kind of, to be frank, from a sense of anxiety about the world and climate change and Hawaii's situation, being very import dependent, as we all know. After coming back from maternity leave, and I spent about a year having conversations with Annie and Albie, Annie of HAPA and Albie at CFS, and kind of coming up with this Food Plus policy program. So they were pretty heavily involved in shaping what it turned out to be, although a lot of it bears my own imprint as well. So it's an internship. We recruit college interns who are studying either within SCFS, the Sustainable Community Food Systems degree program, or related programs that are kind of food systems adjacent, like politics, CTAR, Hawaiian studies, and public health, a number of these kinds of programs. And we basically put the interns to work tracking bills related to the food system as they move through the legislative session, which runs from January through May. So it syncs up exactly more or less with the spring semester. And we lobby. We are registered lobbyists, at least the leadership of the program is, and we work with interns to give them the experience of tracking bills, submitting testimony about food systems related bills, and contacting chairs, using different tools to keep track of everything and automate or more efficiently do all the work that goes into the legislative session that any advocate is aware of. We also produce a weekly newsletter, maintain some social media channels, have text alerts and things like that, to try to get the word out and encourage others in the community to do the same as far as tracking the legislative session and weighing in on legislation that could positively or negatively, in some instances, affect our food system here in Hawaii. We also do outreach projects that the interns kind of design themselves. We table at different events. We try to kind of get the word out. I think kind of a core assumption is that there's a lot of people in Hawaii that care about the food system and care about taking care of our aina and care about feeding their kids good food. And so how can we spread the word to mobilize those people to participate in the legislative process? And that's kind of the task that interns are presented with. We also participate in the Hawaii Food Systems Summit, which usually happens or has happened for the last few years in December or November or January, before the session starts. This is kind of, everything there is to see about what we've achieved so far. And this is our bragging. This is kind of it. We've worked with students. That's kind of our primary output is engaging with them, giving them an experience, giving them learning and skills, and those are things that they can take to future food systems work or to work really in any walk of life where advocacy is involved professionally or personally. So as you can see, we've been able to kind of grow the program steadily. with last year was our kind of our biggest effort yet, with 4 lead advocates. And then in 2025, we're hoping to go bigger. We have a program manager. We want to recruit more students. So hopefully we can continue kind of, yeah, working with these young people. This is some of the mana'o from, I think, the first cohort to kind of explain sort of what that's like. I guess, you know, a lot of this has to do with me being messy to some extent. The experience is a little bit like throw you into it. We're going to figure it out as we go. We don't have all the answers. If you're wondering something, I might not know the answer. So we have to go find out. We have to ask somebody. I guess it's a little bit inspired by that, maybe tech culture, a little bit of like, we're going to piece it together as we go. So it's haphazard. It's not perfect. It's frustrating. It's probably frustrating to people outside as well as inside the program, but there it is. I really believe in makahana ka'ike. The learning is in the doing, and so we put them to work doing. And by the end of it, they often have ideas for how to make everything better that they want to tell me about. And that means success, actually. They have criticisms. They're like, we should have been doing this, this, and this from the beginning. And that to me is success, because now they're thinking about, okay, how to actually run things. For example, this is Food Plus Policy's mission statement. This was developed by the last group. And as you can see, it's quite long. That's probably what stands out most about it initially. The current group, I'm throwing the past year's group under the bus a little bit. The current group of new lead advocates who are returning from the internship, they sit down and they're like, this mission statement is too long. We gotta edit it. And so our mission statement kind of becomes new every year as each new group comes in and puts their stamp on things, and you know, gets the actual experience of critiquing and making the improvements that they want to see made, and experiencing the difficulty of that, or the success of that, or whatever may happen. And then these are our priorities from last year, which again may be updated by the 2025 group. Our priorities are a little bit different from a lot of advocacy organizations in that we don't have particular bills that we have been working on long term that we are the primary champions of, that we push for. It's more like we are getting to know what everyone else is doing. We are, when the legislative session starts, trying to understand all the legislation that's in play that's relevant and trying to work with that. So our priorities are more kind of areas that we care about and values that we hold about what the food system should look like, less so than actual bills that are drafted that, you know, we are primarily the shepherds of. And then something new is that we are attempting to lean into this last year and this coming year civic education workshops. So taking what we've learned about the legislative process and then having some of the returning members go out into the community and present about this, because there is kind of a huge knowledge gap and a hunger for this knowledge. I think it's frightening, it's overwhelming at first, because oh my God, what are all these committees? What are all these lines? What is this whole process? But once you get it, and it's not hugely, you know, it's not rocket science. It's actually doable, although are challenges, certainly. And that's, I think, knowledge that we want to share. It's kind of, I hope for it to be sort of an each one teach one kind of approach, where once we feel like we've learned something, we can spread that knowledge, and the learning actually deepens in doing that kind of sharing outward. As far as our 3 to 5 year future goals, this was a good question to ask for this presentation, actually, that I needed to think about. I mean, I think the core of the program is working with those young people, and in some instances, not so young people, or, you know, we've got some non-traditional students who actually bring a lot to the program with their life experience and perspectives. So working with these people with potential, I guess I should say, is kind of the core of it, and I hope to keep doing that. But breaking into civic tech is something that has been on my mind and that we probably need to do. And by that, I mean engaging the cohorts more in kind of some of the technical tools that can be used for advocacy or for movement building or for awareness raising and all this kind of stuff, which we try to do already, but we could do in a deeper way, especially if we can build capacity on Purple Maita's side for building kind of custom tools or specific use cases that we might want to collaborate and yeah, see what kind of influence civic tech can have on the advocacy scene is something that I'm curious about and that I want to move us toward. Challenges. This slide, I don't know, it might be more like weaknesses. We are less good at engaging with the neighbor islands and including folks who are based on neighbor islands. The program is largely online, and yet it is still a little bit hard to be inclusive of neighbor island folks because the things that are in person, tend to be on Oahu. Most of the participants we've served are on Oahu. We are not as good or knowledgeable about advocacy at the city and county level or at the federal level. That's a frontier that it would be great to get to learn about and share that with our cohorts as well. And then we're not as great at on-the-ground movement building. And I mean, this is across the board a challenge, I think. Like it's easy to be on our computers, writing our testimony, posting our posts, sending our newsletters, which is all important. But there's kind of a sense that person-to-person interaction to build power is the harder work, the more costly work, the sweatier work. And how do we do that and build that in is kind of a question that I haven't yet resolved. We are quite collaborative already. I mentioned a little bit earlier that Sustainable Community Food Systems and HAPA have been long-term collaborators in shaping the program, and we still turn to them for a lot of advice. And in a way, we kind of Food Plus sits in a space where the SCFS has a practicum, and those students participate in Food Plus, and then our I don't know if it's happened yet, but our Food Plus folks are great candidates for participating in some of HAPA's various advocacy and training programs like Kuleana Academy and things like that. And then we are also in collaboration with a lot of the kind of real advocacy groups that have that particular area knowledge on particular policy efforts, such as Appleseed, who you'll hear from, Hi-Fi, and many others that are pushing particular things forward, whether it's the bucks or pesticides or things like that. And I guess I just wanted to end with some questions, because if we're asking about collaboration for scale and impact, I guess I'm always wondering, and I don't have the answer, like what is the thing that will create some wins that we desperately want to see for food systems? Do we need to focus on building a certain critical mass of people that are engaged in this and aware of their power? Is it going to be like an issue that we all agree to unite around? Is it an issue that will be sort of imposed by us by the next kind of catastrophe or crisis? Is it changes in power and leadership to kind of deal with sort of the blocks that are just really hard to overcome? I don't know. Those are questions. Maybe there are other things. And, I guess I put that on this slide because I think there's a sense that the collaboration will make everyone's work better. And I think it will, but I think there's some kind of uniting strategy, right? Or there's some kind of way that it's not just more meetings for people, that it's that it's all gonna have results. I think there's something else, and I don't know what it is. Maybe Ioane and Daniela will have some thoughts. But anyway, this is just my last, I don't know what time I have left, but this is my last slide to kind of pitch keeping up with Food Plus policy. If you like what you heard, if you want to get whatever the interns are going to be putting out in this next 2025 session, we have text alerts. You can sign up by texting IPONO to the number you see on the screen. You can check out our website. You can follow us on Instagram. That's probably our most active social media channel at present. And I would really recommend, ahead of the legislative session, signing up for newsletters of advocacy groups you admire so that you can figure out how to contribute when the time comes. And that's what I have.
Awesome. Amazing presentation. Thank you so much, Kelsey. Yeah, and please feel free to populate questions within the Q&A feature, and Kelsey can address those as this continues on. And now I'd like to welcome Daniela Spoto from Hawaiʻi Appleseed. Daniela?
Thank you so much, Ioane. Let me see if I can get my slides up here. How's that looking for everybody?
Looks great. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, aloha. Thank you so much for having me. This is my second time in this space as a presenter, and I've also attended before. And I was looking at the participant list. I see a lot of friendly faces, but also a ton of new people, which I love. And I think really speaks to how much this issue has so much momentum. It's very broad. And today what I want to kind of do is talk about the overall landscape of food systems policy in Hawaii. I mean, I think we're not really positioned, but I can at least talk about where we are positioned. And then hopefully that helps people sort of clarify, you know, what we at Appleseed do versus, you know, what we can sort of contribute to as far as the larger conversation. And also to share some of the policy tools that we can all apply towards our food policy work, regardless of what the particular issue is. So I work for Hawaiʻi Appleseed, Center for Law and Economic Justice. I was asked to share the mission of our organization. So our mission is we advocate for economic justice for and with Hawaii's people. We decided to keep it real simple. We do have an internal understanding of what economic justice means, and we kind of operationalize it through these 5 issue areas. So food equity is just one of 5 things that we focus on. The others being taxation, fair labor and wages, affordable housing, and transportation equity. So there's obviously still a lot of gaps here. You know, you don't see education, healthcare, criminal justice, but these are the things that we currently have the capacity and expertise to focus on. The gist is that we'd like to change systems that no one in Hawaii ever has to struggle to meet their basic needs, and ultimately everyone has what they need to thrive. So our food equity work has to ultimately support this overall mission of advocating for economic justice. So we have a slightly more targeted mission statement for this issue area. This just helps make sure our work is ultimately supporting our overall mission. And it says that we advocate for a just and equitable food system alongside the people of Hawaii. I always, if you've ever been to my presentations before, you know that I like to define my terms. I think it's really important that we define really large, broad terms like food equity for a couple of reasons. One is that they contain a lot of nuance, and we often run the risk of being interpreted really differently depending on the context. And 2, it can be really hard to operationalize and make them actionable when we're talking about the actual goals of our policies and initiatives. So we do take a pretty expansive view of the concept of an equitable food system. And we've defined 4 broad issue area sort of ideals, you could call them. I wouldn't call them goals because they're not specific enough. We do have goals under each of these areas. But they're sort of broad ideals that will help us move closer to this concept of the equitable food system. So food access and affordability, community and disaster resilience, economic and working conditions for food system workers, and access to land and infrastructure for community-based farms. Most of our work is in the 2 yellow areas, or has historically been in the 2 yellow areas. And you'll see that when I talk a little bit about our past and current initiatives. We expanded to sort of acknowledge the areas in blue, acknowledge that they are important, and they are also, it's for a couple of reasons. One is they're aligned with our mission of economic justice, and 2 is that even though we might have more expertise in the top 2 areas, we really don't want to lose sight of these other ideals because of the concern of unintended consequences. So to kind of elaborate on that a little bit, we could inadvertently be contributing to what you might have heard of termed as the anti-hunger industrial complex. So this is where large corporations like Amazon or Walmart or Pepsi are the primary contributors to anti-hunger causes, or even large agribusiness operations, even local ones. So they could be supporting our food access efforts or even a strong local food system, and yet they're exploiting their workers, not paying livable wages, and ultimately, you know, undermining our overall efforts towards economic justice. So I think it's important for us to really think about all of the initiatives that we do are not at odds with each other. You know, looking at the people doing affordable housing work or taxation work, this helps us sort of frame that up. I also wanted to talk about, I was asked to talk about our core activities. And I think this is really important because at least once a week, I find myself in a meeting or a conversation with somebody using the term policy as sort of an active noun. but realizing that we have really differing ideas of what policy actually looks like in practice. And I'm not saying that these activities are the only ones involved in advocacy work. I think Kelsey just gave a really great example of some other ones that are very important. That's building our, up and coming leaders. But these are the ways that Appleseed has operationalized them. So community engagement, getting people to come down and use their voices at the legislature. We do a lot of research and use a lot of data to, understand what's the best course of action. We engage in a lot of professional networks. We use media and communication strategies to change narratives and get our point across. And then, of course, lobbying and testifying at the legislature. And we try to underlie centering equity and inclusion in all of these strategies. I'm not going to dive deep into all of these, but I will give a few examples in our current and past initiatives that sort of hopefully will paint a picture of what this sort of day-to-day of policy work looks like. So here's just a few of our notable past achievements. Back in 2010, this is before my time at Hawaiʻi Appleseed, our organization filed a lawsuit against the state that ultimately led to process improvements for SNAP applications. So we were seeing a real drop off in timeliness of SNAP applications. So this bumped the state's timeliness rate from 75% to 95% within a year. We don't use litigation as often anymore. We do have the capacity to do it. It's still sort of in our back pocket if we need it. And that's for when, the state is not actually acting on the policies that it's supposed to act on. Around 21 and 2022, we did some research and worked closely with the USDA and our congressional delegation to ultimately get our federal reimbursement rate for child nutrition programs increased. This resulted in additional around $8 million annually for school breakfast and lunch. So we do some federal advocacy as well. We also recently were sort of peripherally supporting the opening access to COFA citizens for SNAP and other federal benefits. So we do sort of work a little bit on the federal side as well. But most of our work is around state legislature. We've been involved in the Debucks campaign, which I know many of the folks on the call have also been extremely active in and know a lot about since back in 2019. So that was when the Department of Agriculture first created the program through legislature. And then most of you know, back at the last legislative session, it was funded permanently at $1.5 million annually going forward. So those are a few of the successes. Just to give you an example of the types of work that we do and what can be accomplished with those strategies. I'm going to go into just a couple of our current initiatives now. We are focused this session on passing legislation that would fund universal free school meals for all students. So right now, if you are under a certain eligibility threshold, you automatically, or not automatically, you have to enroll in order to receive free meals. If a parent fails to turn in an application, or if they fall just above the eligibility thresholds, or for a variety of other reasons, a lot of kids slip through the cracks. This is going to be our 4th year championing this legislation. We're feeling a lot more momentum going into this session than prior years. And a lot of that is because, we are using all of those strategies I talked about. But last year we saw a lot of momentum, I would say, in our community engagement area. Our partners at HAPA were able to, get a lot of students, high school students to come down and testify. I think that had a lot of impact. You can see some of the students lobbying here, and then that's a picture of them after the House Education Committee hearing, which it did pass through. The next initiative that I'm going to touch on is actually not a legislative initiative, but I still consider it policy because it is changing a policy. It's more of an administrative policy. And it might require some legislation in the future. So we're currently assisting the state Medicaid office, MedQuest, in implementing a waiver that would authorize Medicaid coverage of these 4 nutrition support services here. So basically, community organizations that are offering produce prescriptions would be able to receive Medicaid reimbursement if the patient, meets certain eligibility requirements. Right now, our role in the project is primarily research. We're in the middle of conducting a sort of landscape assessment of, who's out there providing services. And so I will, be on the lookout for this report. If you're interested in food as medicine, there will be, a lot that needs to be done to build capacity of the network to be able to accept these dollars. And we want to make sure that these dollars are getting channeled as much as possible into local providers and into our local farmers' pockets, which we've seen in other states that very easily could be, Amazon and Walmart that step in because they have the capacity to be able to deal with the bureaucracy. And we're really advocating for that to not be the case. How we collaborate. So I have 3 more slides. I want to touch a little bit on the ways that we work in concert with other organizations. I mentioned that professional networks is one of our advocacy strategies. It can look like a lot of things. We can participate in other professional networks. We can do sort of ad hoc working groups. But we also, in our food equity work, are the backbone. Appleseed is the backbone organization for the Hawaiʻi Hunger Action Network. It's a membership network of about 30 or so organizations with the mission of alleviating hunger for all Hawaii residents. It first started back in 2018, and prior to that, there was no real space to discuss these types of issues. It's been really heartening to see the progress that we made in the past almost 7 years together, and shifts in narratives, successes, and really elevating the food insecurity discourse. So I think this is a really effective strategy, and one thing that I think we can really excel at, and folks on the call who are part of the Hawaiʻi Hunger Action Network have really been instrumental in helping us be successful. So the network is statewide, and we prioritize a couple of key pieces of legislation every session. This year, we've selected these 3 priorities. So the network is also going to be championing universal free school meals, but they will also be championing raising SNAP eligibility thresholds. So right now, what happens is if you are just a couple of dollars over the threshold, you can drop off, losing all of your benefits and ultimately net negative in your monthly budget. So we want to see if we can get sort of a graduated drop off using some state funds to supplement that. And the county also the network also wants to look at providing some state emergency feeding assistance. We're calling that farm to family. So contributing funding to food banks and other emergency feeding organizations to meet the increased demand on our emergency food system, especially during times of disaster, which there just seems to be one every year, man-made or natural. And this funding would ideally prioritize purchasing from local farmers. Again, Appleseed is the backbone for this. So these are not necessarily Appleseed's priorities. We try not to push our agenda on the network. We've never had anything be at odds with what the network has selected, but we can support in ways such as submitting written testimony and action alerts. We don't put the full weight of our organization towards the ones that we don't necessarily have the capacity for. And then I was asked to discuss what some of the challenges that we face are. So budget constraints, you might have noticed that all of our priorities cost money. We believe the government should provide adequate safety nets to tax-paying citizens. You might also remember from the earlier part of the slides that we also advocate for fair taxation, including tax measures that would raise revenue by raising taxes on corporations and millionaires to offset these safety nets. But that said, every year we run up against the fact that there's a lot of budget priorities, and sometimes these safety net programs that we think are essential end up falling through the cracks. Administrative capacity. So even if the budget argument, we can get through that, we sometimes butt heads with departments. A lot of state departments are historically understaffed and under-resourced, and frankly, some are maybe a little bit dysfunctional. So legislators will really pass a bill that's opposed by the department that would administer it. So if they say, look, we can't take this on right now, it can be an additional barrier. Similar to what Kelsey was saying, community engagement, really getting folks to come down and tell their personal stories. We're always looking for people with personal stories, lived experience, or even just a strong opinion. If you have a kid in school and you think it would be great that, or you see that their friends are struggling, for you to come down and tell that story as just a concerned citizen, that goes a long way, and it's just always something that's really challenging to do. And then finally, political will. Ultimately, all of these are overcomable, and we are a blue state, but a lot of our state lawmakers are quite conservative in their politics and fundamentally don't agree that the state should be paying for some of these things. So it is a challenge that we must overcome and to hold our elected officials accountable for helping us achieve our mutual goal of an equitable food system. And we all get to define what that looks like. I didn't want to end on a challenge note. I know that we are going to discuss, as a group, maybe some further questions about how we can collaborate together, but that is the end of my presentation. So thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Daniela. And moving right along, I want to introduce Annie Frederick from HAPA. The floor is yours, Annie. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And thanks to my two co-presenters, which I get the privilege of collaborating with, who are amazing. So HAPA, our mission is to catalyze community empowerment and systemic change towards valuing Aina and people ahead of corporate profits. And to kind of unpack where our mission comes from, I really need to start out of the movement that we were born out of. So this is an aerial shot of Waimea town in West Kauai from around 2014. And if you can sort of notice these fields surrounding the town, these are all agrochemical test fields. So HAPA was born out of a movement really when communities in West Kauai began to experience health impacts from pesticide drift from these agrochemical fields. They started to initially question what they were being exposed to, and then ask for some basic protections. And there were a series of incidents between 2006 and 2008 when pesticide drift basically sent students and teachers to the hospital on multiple occasions, and residents were getting sick as well. And so as a community faced, tremendous resistance in getting basic information to what they were exposed to, and just these basic protections, they began to organize. And we saw the largest marches on Kauai that we've ever seen, around like thousands of people turning out in the streets just to demand like basic public health protections, which should sort of be a no-brainer. But what we realize is we're up against this multinational, multi-billion-dollar industry that is incredibly well-resourced and really fought tooth and nail to prevent even just disclosure of information. Flash forward to around 2012 and 13, Kauai County, amongst other counties, passed a bill enacting some of these measures that the community had been asking for. So namely disclosure of restricted use pesticides and buffer zones around sensitive areas and an environmental and health study. The chemical companies promptly sued all three counties who passed similar ordinances, and ultimately the courts decided that it was really only the state's jurisdiction to regulate pesticides and GMOs. So around that time in 2014, HAPA was founded to really build capacity to take on, this was all kind of very grassroots, volunteer-led organizing, to be one entity that could hold some of that organizing, policy advocacy, educational events and communications and research. And so the founders of HAPA really conceived the organization around 4 interconnected program areas: fair and sustainable food systems, community-based resource stewardship, reclaiming democracy, and social and economic justice, with really food systems at sort of the center of the organization. So I'll share a little bit about our work. So we were successful in 2018, finally advocating for some of the measures that the community had been asking for. So we passed a bill which became Act 45 in 2018, which mandated the disclosure of restricted use pesticides Hawaii-wide, and also banned a very heavily used insecticide called chlorpyrifos. From lawsuits related to West Kauai, we learned that this particular insecticide was being applied at 3 times the national average, approximately 100 feet from Hawaiian homesteads in Keikaha. And we know from reams of peer-reviewed studies that this particular insecticide definitively causes neurological damage in fetuses and children at over a half a mile exposure. So we know as a result of this that our communities are much safer However, we got only 100-foot buffer zones around schools during school hours for restricted use pesticides, which we know is not sufficient based on the science. So basically what we launched this pesticides and public health campaign on the heels of winning access to that data. And this is our attempt to really take the data and put it into legible terms for community. So the way the data is reported, it's multiple different increments of pounds, ounces. So we put it in one consistent increment. It's a really heavy lift to get that data to the point where it's just understandable to an everyday person. But what we learned from the first year of data is that the top 10 users account for 99% of all restricted use pesticide use across Hawaii. And that only 5 of those, amongst the thousands of food producers across Hawaii, only 5 of them are really growing food for local consumption. We also tried to share out just like some of the findings from our analysis of the data and the different restricted use pesticides that we're seeing being used. This is just the information for Central Oahu, which emerged as a really surprising. We didn't realize how like the bulk of RUP use that there was in Central Oahu stretching to the North Shore. So we prioritized really getting that information out to this community and identifying concerning adjacencies between heavy usage and residential areas, waterways, coastal areas, knowing that like some of the heavily used pesticides are also water contaminants and lethal to aquatic species, as well as a whole array of public health concerns. So this is some of the data that we presented out to the community, including some of the most heavily used pesticides in their area. This is a link to our full presentation, which is on HAPA's website. And this is from a presentation in 2022 with the Whitmore community. And some of the media coverage of these findings. So a lot of that research then informs our policy advocacy work. But what we've learned also over the years is that just regulating the bad is not enough. We need to really support a broader array of policies that are going to transform our food system in a positive way. And we really rely heavily on our partners like Appleseed and Food Plus Policy to link arms with around this work. That, you know, certain groups have certain policy expertise in different areas. We still lead on all the pesticide protection bills, but we try to amplify and support approximately 50 bills a year and mobilize testimony. We really try to help people to interface similar to Food Plus and Appleseed engage in the legislature from across the Pa'i'aina. I'd say because we're born out of struggles on Kauai, our focus tends to be often more like neighbor island and trying to bring, because it's often more challenging for neighbor island folks to, you know, take off a day of work, come travel to the capital. Thankfully, now we have remote testimony, but we try to make it accessible and as easy for folks as possible. So a lot of our work is done in coalition. And we do regularly, similar to our partners on this call, send out action alerts, and we just try to make it as easy for people to engage as possible around our food systems agenda. So in 2024, we sent out 23 emails. We had about 42% open rate. And we analyzed our digital organizing to, I think of the alerts we sent out, about 50% of the testimony generated from those alerts could be attributed to our digital organizing. Unfortunately, none of our pesticide bills even got a hearing, which is really a testament to the influence that this industry still has in our local politics, unfortunately. We also have a campaign called Public Lands for the Public Good, where this again kind of grows out of our original movement struggles. The fact that this is an aerial photograph of ADC lands in West Kauai in the Mana Plain. And the ADC is the Agribusiness Development Corporation. They oversee about 23,000 acres of public agricultural lands. Those are also crown lands. And the majority of those lands are on the west side of Kauai, and the majority of the Kauai lands are leased to agrochemical corporations. So they benefit from those, both the public lands and the waters that flow to them. And what we found over the years is just a total lack of transparency and accountability around what happens on those lands, and the impacts to the adjacent community. So we've been advocating for years to get an audit of the agency, and finally in 2019, there was a bill passed to audit the agency. The results came out in 2021, and it was scathing. Since then, and with the leadership change of the agency, we have seen it shift a little bit in terms of its mandate and practices, which is good, but there's still much more work to be done. And so what we find is one of the greatest challenges that we face, that both the two other panelists have mentioned, is really a lack of political will. And the lack of political will that we kind of bumped up against in our early movement work is what inspired us to found Kuleana Academy, which is a political leadership training program that was founded in 2016. We just graduated our 7th cohort this last year, and we will be opening applications again in January for a May cohort in 2025. And we roughly tee these up around electoral cycles so that folks who do take the education they have from the program to run for elected office are able to kind of apply it quickly after. But it's not really just running for office. It's really engaging in civic process more broadly. And it's also not unique to food systems. It's really looking at an array of policy issues across Hawaii. So these are just some photos of our 7th cohort. And we have a really, again, it's like a Hawaii-wide program. So folks from across the islands, we bring together for about 100 hours of training. It's a really in-depth program. And what we've really seen is that our folks are doing incredible. These are just some of the events related to the program. We have 120 graduates to date. 48 have run for public office. 64 have supported electoral campaigns. 94 are engaged in some kind of advocacy or organizing campaigns in their community. 10 have served or are currently serving on neighborhood boards on Oahu, and 7 are serving on boards and commissions. And then this current election cycle, 15 are running for office. And these are those who are currently serving in office that are graduates of the program. And what we've seen especially is that probably the most critical mass has been on the Maui County Council, is they have been at the forefront of really incredible food systems change, whether it be, and that's not us, that's them in their professional capacity as elected officials. But what we're seeing still is we just don't have the critical mass yet. We don't support candidates or campaigns. We can't, we're a C3, but we can provide the training and education so that folks can effectively engage in that process. And so what we've also expanded is our alumni organizing. It's such a dynamic group of individuals that we see a lot of fertile ground there for like ongoing collaboration and connection. So we've been doing a lot more of alumni convenings to keep that network connected and to continue to build those relationships over time. We recently held an all alumni gathering in 2022, and we'll be doing another one this winter. And these are just some photos from that gathering. And basically we try to tailor these gatherings to ongoing continuing education and learning within the network. So I'd say for us, that the ongoing challenges are really similar to what the other panelists have flagged. It's critical mass of people engaging in legislative process and organizing on the ground around food systems transformation, it's political will. And so those like really inform our 3 to 5 year trajectory of what we're going to focus on, is building a base and building that bench of people who can step into roles of leadership. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Annie. Well, I can see we don't really have that many questions, which tells me all of our panelists have done a fantastic job of explaining what it is they do. And it seems like everyone's getting a real grasp on what these organizations do individually and within the community and working with one another. one of the things I wanted to highlight on too, Annie said that the pesticide bills weren't even receiving hearings, and that's just something every one of our participants today, our guests watching this, can be a part of helping change that, and write letters and encourage these bills to be heard. And if they hear enough, they can't ignore all of us forever. Yeah, so I think that's extremely important. And if you want to drop some contact info in the chat too, if folks do think of questions later, they can email you with any questions. That would be great. Some follow-on questions I want to address the entire panel. One thing we want to know from the Kale Mouse Center's perspective, what can we do at UH to, help support your work through research, education, policy analysis, etc. And maybe we can just go around and take turns and kind of address that question, starting with you, Kelsey.
What can you guys do to support? Yeah, I think there's so much in sort of knowledge generation that we can try to share out in an effective sort of, not too much, not too little way with our communities. And even with the students that I work with, some of them come from, different disciplines, public health versus tropical agriculture versus, these other things. So yeah, there's a lot of knowledge that could be shared that could kind of open people's eyes about what could be possible for our food system, and kind of in that sort of seeding the idea that like it is possible for us to have nice things, so that kind of strikes me as one thing, how to disseminate the research and the policy analysis, and even, learning about initiatives that have been successful in other places. I think the universal free school meals feel so much more possible just because I've heard about that was successful in Minnesota. There's kind of been a light shown on that, but with the federal elections going on right now and walls and all of that. So yeah, I guess I would be interested in, how to connect the research and knowledge generation being done in the university with community as we try to build that critical mass, get people engaged. I don't know. What do Anne and Daniela think?
Daniela?
Go ahead, Anne. Go ahead, Annie.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate in terms of like what the center can do to support this work. I think the work that you guys are already doing, SCFS is doing, and building that relationship with Purple Maya to like build the alloy of advocates, from college to to professional life, if you will, is really valuable. I think getting more students engaged in kind of the hands-on work is really helpful, or building a culture of like civic engagement and participation. I think, I really appreciate that about Kelsey's collaboration with UH West Oahu, but I think we could use even more of that. Like, it's just, we don't have the base of support yet. Like I was saying, we don't have, it's going to take, it's definitely a longer term project to build, I think, the bench of leadership and the political will. So anything that I think feeds into that is really valuable.
Mahalo, Annie.
The only thing I would add is, very specifically on the universal free school meals, or I guess any of those other campaigns, the SNAP expansion or farm to family, if there's a student or group of students that wants to get involved, we would love to have them join sort of our campaign planning group. And, we need people to help with social media or drafting talking points or keeping track of testimony. So there's definitely tasks that could be assigned if there's, a group of students that wants to do this as part of a class or just as part of being part of the center. And then we also do take on interns that do more exploratory research. So, knowing what what I discussed are the parameters of our food equity work. If something in there sounds interesting to you and you would like to come on and sort of have the opportunity to explore that with some mentorship, and ultimately potentially for it to become a future policy campaign, that's also something that we offer.
Great, thank you. And feel free to check out the Q&A. Alex kind of posed the same question from the city and county perspective as well. So feel free to answer that within the Q&A feature. Yeah, and I think just, one more sort of follow-up for everyone. If you could name, one thing that participants can do right now to best support your work or promote sustainable food systems in Hawaii, what would you think that would be?
I would say, joining things like this, being a part of the center and trying to be as involved in as many networks as you can, because there's a lot. I mentioned the Hawaii Hunger Action Network. Annie does the Kuleana Academy. Some of them are cohorts, some of them are internships, some of them are just open participation, like the Hawaii Hunger Action Network, and there's others as well. Networking is very important, and you'll find opportunities through that, and also just educate yourself on the landscape of the partners that will sort of set you up to find whatever the right fit is for you, other than the sort of opportunities to get involved in a single campaign.
Wow. Annie or Kelsey?
I would say for us, it just sort of depends on your positionality and your time and availability, but something as simple as signing up for any of our email lists and submitting testimony, it really does matter. They really do look at the volume of testimony as well as the quality, and people have specific connections to issues. But I'd say, yeah, in terms of depending on what your interests are, find ways. I agree with everything Daniela said, figure out what network that's already exists that you can plug into, and you can reach out to really any of us based on your interest and your expertise, and see where that might be.
Yeah, similar, the easy question or the easy answer is just sign up for our newsletter or sign up for our text alerts or things like that, because that really is how the word gets out during the session. I guess another thought is just do you feel the call to learn more about this? If you or someone it feels that way, I think we will be recruiting our next cohort in the next few months to start in January. So Kelsey at purplemaya.org, you can email me. My email's in the answers in the Q&A. And I think it's going to be shared with everybody too on the chat. Yeah, because I think the more people we have that have some kind of basic knowledge of this, then it's okay, then we can get together and build a movement that will be necessary in the next, I don't know, what is it going to take, 10 years or so, or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd say, my personal endorsement, I was fortunate enough to be a part of the first couple of Food Plus Policy cohorts, and I learned a great deal of things about just basic interactions with policy at the Capitol, and just things on how to set up accounts, just all the 101 stuff, all the really basic stuff. And I think, just having that confidence just kind of promotes more activity from the community. So it's a really great program. All of your organizations are doing great work within the community. We really appreciate you taking the time to present today. Just want to thank you again on behalf of the Kale Mao Center.